Today, we're going to tackle a huge question. What exactly is corporate strategy? It's something that has kept executives and academics busy for a long, long time. We're going to dive deep into a really important paper that brings some much-needed clarity to the topic. It's Amelia Feldman's 2020 article, Corporate Strategy, Past, Present, and Future. At the very heart of this entire field is a question that seems simple, but is actually incredibly deep. It was famously posed back in 1994. What limits the scope of the firm? Or to put it another way, why do some companies become these sprawling empires involved in everything, while others stay laser-focused on just one thing? That is the fundamental puzzle corporate strategy is trying to solve. For a long time, the world of strategy was kind of split in two. It was like a big tug of war. On one side, you had the industrial organization, or IO view. It basically said that what matters most is the industry a company competes in. But on the other side, you had the resource-based view, or RBV, which argued no, it's all about a company's unique internal strengths and resources. This debate actually created two separate fields, one looking outside the company's walls and one looking inside. So let's get a clear definition on the table. What is corporate strategy, really? Well, it all comes down to how managers decide the scope of their company. Think of it as answering three core questions. First, what businesses should we actually be in? Second, how do we get into them or out of them, buying and selling? And third, once we own all these different parts, how do we manage everything and spread our resources around effectively? But here's the kicker, and this is the problem Feldman's paper really zeroes in on. Even with mountains of research on this stuff, there was no single framework to organize it all. It was just a big collection of interesting ideas and studies. You had all these great puzzle pieces, but no picture on the box to show you how they all fit together. So the paper introduces this really elegant solution, which it calls a telescoping view. I want you to imagine looking through a telescope. You start with a really tight focus, and then you gradually zoom out. So first, we're going to look at actions happening inside the company. Then we zoom out a bit to see actions between our company and others. And finally, we zoom all the way out to look at the big actions that actually change the company's boundaries. And this table just lays it all out so clearly. Each of those levels of the telescope, intra, inter, and extra, has its own set of managerial actions and its own set of theories that help explain them. For instance, if you're looking inside the firm, theories about dynamic capabilities are super relevant. But if you're deciding whether to buy another company entirely, you need different tools, like agency theory, to really understand what might be motivating that decision. Okay, so let's grab that telescope ourselves and really deconstruct each of these three parts of the framework. First up, we're zooming all the way into intra-organizational action. This is all about what happens inside the house. It's the internal playbook. We're talking about how a company decides where to invest its money, how it moves people and technology between its different business units, and how it tries to find those valuable synergies that make the whole thing worth more than the sum of its parts. Now, to really get what's happening here, there are a few key lenses we can use. Dynamic capabilities helps us understand how a company can adapt and change over time. Resource redeployment is like looking at the internal chess game of moving assets around for the biggest impact. And then agency theory adds this crucial dose of reality, reminding us that managers are people, and sometimes their decisions might benefit themselves more than the company. All right, let's pull back a bit. Time to zoom out one level. So next up is inter-organizational action. Now we're looking across the firm's boundaries. We're not just managing what's inside our own walls anymore, we're coordinating relationships with other companies. Think joint ventures, strategic alliances, partnerships, all that good stuff. And to make sense of this, a couple of big ideas are really helpful. The relational view suggests that incredible value can be created when two firms team up and combine their unique strengths in just the right way. Then network theory takes that idea even further. It says that a company's entire web of relationships, who it partners with, who it learns from, can be a massive strategic advantage. And finally, let's take that last step back for the widest possible view. This is extra-organizational action. And honestly, this is the big one. This is where managers are literally redrawing the map of the company itself. They're deciding which businesses belong inside the firm and which ones don't. This is the world of mergers, acquisitions, spin-offs, and divestitures. What's so fascinating here is that you can view these massive, company-altering decisions in two totally different ways. On one hand, resource reconfiguration sees them as smart, strategic moves, buying new capabilities or shedding businesses that no longer fit. But agency theory gives us a more skeptical perspective. It asks, is the CEO making this acquisition to create shareholder value or to run a bigger empire and get a bigger paycheck? It's a critical question. So we have this fantastic new framework that helps us organize everything we know about corporate strategy. That's great. But maybe the most powerful part of this paper is that it doesn't just look back. It lays out a clear roadmap for the future.
It poses the question, now that we have this map, where are the unexplored territories? What are the big, unanswered questions that this framework can help us finally tackle?
Looking inside the firm, for example, we could really dig into how the individual biases and thinking styles of the top management team affect where a company places its bets. Or, what is the real difference between a company run by a single founding family versus one with thousands of anonymous shareholders? And what about that space between firms? So many juicy questions there. Like, does getting really good at buying companies also make you good at selling them? Do those skills transfer? And what about the intermediaries, the investment bankers, the consultants? How much do they really shape the outcomes of these deals? And for those huge, boundary-changing moves, the paper calls for a major shift in our thinking. We need to stop looking at mergers and divestitures as just single, isolated events. Instead, we should be studying them as a connected series of moves over time, like watching a long-term strategic story unfold. The paper also makes a really important plea. This kind of research can't just live in academic journals. How can this framework help actual managers on the ground make better decisions when they're facing what they call wicked problems? And on the flip side, how should governments think about the impact of taxes, regulations, and trade policy on how corporations shape themselves? So, at the end of the day, the challenge this paper leaves us with is a big one. How can we all, scholars, managers, and policymakers, use this way of thinking to treat corporate strategy not as a series of disconnected events, but as a single, dynamic, and coherent agenda over time? Answering that could very well change how the great companies of the future are built.